I'm Jean Gray, publisher of American Entrepreneurship Today and host of the podcast series Experience Voices, where I talk with highly accomplished people who share the critical elements that led to their success. Not many college students can claim their startup won $100,000 at a pitch competition, which was held at the San Diego Angel Conference, and then later gained additional seed funding. Our guest today on Experience Voices is Dominyck Bullard, a student athlete, now student entrepreneur, who accomplished both soon after launching his digital media startup, Athletiverse, in his sophomore year. His company manages the digital assets of college, universities, and collectives, supporting student athletes and athletic departments. Dominyck shares how he navigated from the initial business concept through key milestones that landed him the support of outside investors, positioning his startup to scale. Welcome to Experience Voices, Dominyck.
Gene, it's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's start off by having you share your model. I was very intrigued that you began as an athlete and now you're turning into an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to keep it as simple as possible, my company Athletiverse, our model is, bridging the gap between fans and athletes through digital experiences. And everything is really centered around, nowadays helping different athletic departments and teams around professional sports monetize their social audiences, right? How do we take, these followers that are longtime fans, maybe on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever they are, and turning them into obviously paying, clients and customers.
So you used the term NIL in our discussion. Explain a little bit to listeners how important that is in digital marketing.
It's huge. NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. The term was really coined, back in the late 80s and early 90s, back when March Madness days really brought it around, when players, started to try and get paid for all the TV buzz and media deals they were bringing in. Everyone knows the infamous Reggie Bush story and losing a Heisman, obviously, to receiving compensation. And all that changed in 2021 when the Supreme Court legalized that college athletes could be compensated for their name, image, and likeness. And that really opened up the market to us at the college space. And me, coming from being a college athlete at the time, it was kind of the marrying of two perfect opportunities, right? I was still very much in the college space. And, now athletes could get paid to be a part of it. And so it very quintessential to what we're doing at Athletiverse. And obviously it's been fun to see the impact it's had on so many lives so far.
Are your initial clients athletic departments, and does each athletic department oversee a number of different sports? So if you get into an athletic department, you've created this great opportunity across a few different sports. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah, our primary clients are athletic departments and collectives now. You brought up the term NIL, right? So that all these universities now have, what's called, NIL collectives. These are a group of alumni and donors that are specifically brought together to help student athletes get paid. And so we work primarily, with athletic departments and collectives. And the fun part about that, like you said, is it does range to all sorts of sports. Every one of our customers so far, has had at least their hands on, 10 to 12 different sports. It's fun to be a part of. You're not pigeonholed into just football or just basketball. And it's been fun, especially to see the effect on all the female sports that we've been a part of.
Dominyck, explain to the listeners how you provide your services.
Absolutely. No, great question. It's all about the client's goals, right? So if we go work with, let's say USC's collective, in this case, House of Victory, right? If House of Victory is trying to do, let's say they're trying to sell more tickets, right? Then we'll initially look at, the current database of either followers, emails, whatever types of data they have on folks. And then we can really, get into, I think, the service part where it's, how do we convert them? What kind of, digital tool in our toolbox can we use to kind of get in front of these folks and get them to convert, really? So, like I said, very specific to what the client's goals are. Some people want to just raise more money in donations. Some want to sell more tickets, some want to sell merchandise, right? So it really depends, on who we're talking to at a given time. But, first step one is always diagnosis, right? And you got to ask what success looks like. I think that's extremely important when working with clients to make sure that, we satisfy their needs.
So let's start a little bit back at the beginning. Not so much, we had talked a little bit about your initial model, but when you went to take the current model out for a drive, so to say, you had to prove out your concept to yourselves. How did you do that?
Ooh, initially, Gene, we failed pretty hard in doing that. Really, I'd say the first year was a bit of a struggle because we came up with an idea originally built on specifically just working with student athletes and not athletic departments and collectives, and I didn't really test the idea out. I kind of wrote it on paper, created a business plan, and said, let's go do this thing. And I think obviously you learn by doing, of course, and you kind of fail forward. So we failed quickly and moved on. From there, in terms of how we've perfected the model and pivoted to where we are today, it was really, narrowing down, I would say just the conversations, right? Let's pick a specific client and that client only that we want to help address and talk to them, right? We had a lot of conversations, before we even launched this side of the business. I think I spoke with at least over 25 different athletic department personnel at different schools, including my own, at the University of San Diego. And really, one, ask them, hey, is this a need? Is this something that, is a pain point? And second of all, what are schools willing to pay for it, right? So I think to simplify that whole thing down a little bit, it's really targeting on a micro group to begin with, right? What's our testing data? We have to have some sort of product market fit, before we decide to go to market and blow the horn on what it is that we're doing.
So it sounds like being a student athlete has its benefits if you aren't going to be drafted immediately by one of the major league teams. So
Absolutely. No doubt about that.
okay, so your next step is the platform, is creating something that projects your model. So how did you go from you were testing the water, you did this additional survey to pivot into the athletic departments as your true targeted customer, but now you had to make an investment into technology. Give me a sense of how long it took and maybe a couple of the challenges that your first exposure to, being an entrepreneur and getting your vision into a technology base.
Oh, it feels, Gene, it feels endless, honestly. The tech part was not fun. In total, it was, 8 to 9 months of development before, we had really reached our MVP, most viable product, which is, it's even pre-stage one. It's as bare bones as tech gets. But essentially the process was pretty straightforward in that, we mapped out on paper, what it is we wanted the functionality to look like. One, we then, second, I guess to that, we had the conversation, is this even possible? Does the tech exist? And it did, which is, fantastic. And we knew how to build it. And third is obviously the testing you go through. It's 3 to 4 months of breaking the thing over and over again. And not to mention the UI that goes into it, the user interface, right? Is it nice for people to use? Is it, compatible on mobile in dark mode and light mode? There's so many different nuances that go into that. And ultimately, yeah, tech's extremely difficult to develop. And I think we learned that pretty quickly.
Did you find that you underestimated your budget, or you had some advice which you found out your budget was close to target?
Our budget ended up being close to target. I think we had originally allocated, I think we were going to spend 120,000 on development, and we spent just over 45,000 as I recall. Now, that being said, we got to the MVP stage of the product and said to ourselves, this is no good for mass use, truthfully, right? we use it now proprietarily, right? And internally, we use it ourselves, but we're not licensing it out to folks, and it's not an open platform, right? And so when we made that decision to not burn any more capital, because I think if we were to have gone the full length of the true development and getting the platform to the place that it's on every person's iPhone in America, we would have probably spent $250,000, if not more, and would have had to raise, probably some significant capital to keep that alive and to keep the development, going. What I think people underestimate with technology is, let's say you allocate $250,000 to developing an app. Well, once that app is done, sure, you might have paid the $250,000 and it's good to go. But now it's the customer service that's going into it. It's the bugs. It's the debunking the whole thing. It's a charade, because folks are going to get on the platform, and people are going to find ways to break things in manners that you never even thought possible. And so you have to now probably have another $250,000 on top of that just to keep the development team going and fixing things as they're breaking. And next thing you know, you're out $500,000 and you don't know if the thing makes any money or not. So it can be quite the nerve-wracking experience. As you and I both know, that money does not grow on trees.
That's a very big learning curve for someone to get through. So congrats for doing that. Now that you are focusing on your target audience and you are bringing clients in, how have you thought about the development of your team to make it more than just about Dominyck?
Great question. Jane, when we had made the decision to, stop, I would say, burning capital on the tech side and get really specific into, having a business model that's bootstrappable and that growth pays for itself, we've gone about our team in that manner. I will say it's, especially in this day and age, specifically being a West Coast based company, I have no idea if that has anything to do with it. Maybe some biases in there, but it's very difficult to find folks that are not just passionate about what you're doing and want to see it succeed, but willing to put in the work it takes to get paid necessarily, right? So a lot of growing the team it's been a challenge, to say the least, over the past 2 years. But we have a solid team today, and that's been because we have consistently hired and brought people in that are not just paying for our growth, right? The work that they're doing is generating revenue, but they've also been willing to say, hey, I'm willing to bet on myself here. A lot of the contracts that I think as founders you should put together early on, if they're not equity based, are certainly incentive goal based, right? Saying, hey, if we hit X amount of whatever, whether it's sales, new leads, closes, right? We're paying for that, and the growth's paying for that. So the company's not necessarily burning any more money, and you're growing at the right pace, right? It's not too much, too little. And so, developing that team has been very, very paramount. And the cornerstone has been, that incentive of, hey, can you grow with us, right? We don't want to spend, $500,000 on a VP that, gets us all of, I don't know, $25,000 back a year, right? That just makes no sense. But you see a lot of that these days.
So I'm going to ask a harder question now, is because you kind of referenced it, is, when you're bringing someone on board, you have to start thinking in terms of projections. And projections are probably the biggest challenge or hurdle for first-time entrepreneurs to get their arms around, because if you make a statement about what something is supposed to be and then you missed your target or your milestone, it's not a good thing. How important has projections emerged in order for you to, define the model to an outside party? They're curious to know, right?
Absolutely. Gene, I have a rule that we like to play with in-house called the 70-15-15 rule. So the 75 or the 70 part, right? That's it. The theory goes back to data science. It's all built around, training data, testing it, and then validating it. And so whether it's a hire whether it's making a market prediction, a client prediction, saying, me emailing our investors, hey, we're shooting for, $250,000 in revenue this, quarter, right? Whatever it is, before I get to the point where I'm making any sort of prediction, I'm making sure that there is a very, very large sum of testing that's been done, right? 70% is conducting, market analysis, customer reviews, peer reviews, talking to folks. Hey, what is going on? What can we expect here before we even go and make not just another prediction, but validate it, for heaven's sakes, right? So 70% of my time and energy is always trying to ask harder questions like you just did, right? And figure out from folks what's really going on out there. The other 15% is, okay, let's go try something. And then that final 15% is, hey, did we validate whether this works or not? And if we validated that it works, then I'll make the prediction. Then I'll tell the whole world, hey, this is this is the hill I'm going to go die on right here, right? So I think that's been my thought process to a lot of different things, whether it's market projections, hiring a new salesperson, right? It's really built around realistic expectations and realistic outcomes. What have we seen that's been done so far, right? Because I think as entrepreneurs and as founders and in startups, you can get a little bit hooked on the, we're going to go change the world and do something that's never been done before. And I think most of the time, you don't really have to reinvent the wheel. So
it sounds like you're drawing on your data background a lot to do this. So we have a student athlete who's majoring in, what were you saying? I think you told me, what's your major? Data analytics?
Data analytics.
Okay. It sounds like you've got a nice match going on there. So that's always a good sign for entrepreneurs if they're pulling something out of their background that can be immediately applied to the challenge. So let's talk a little bit about funding, because I know you've had some really nice success in this area. So, well, I guess the spend that you had to commit to build the platform, did that occur first out of your own pocket, or I know you also won a competition? Where did that fall in getting the model forward?
Yeah, most of the original development of the tech was out of pocket. I've been pretty fortunate. I've been able to balance a couple jobs in between playing all this baseball over the past probably 6 to 7 years now. So I was able to put up, let's just put a figure out there, 5 figures, right, to get things off the ground. Very fortunate that my parents and family pitched in with that as well. So it was, that probably paid us for maybe 70 to 80% of the total development, and then the rest was obviously from money we had raised from more friends, and then from obviously the San Diego Angel Conference, which I'm sure we'll talk more about here in a second. But that was the split number wise in terms of how much I personally put in versus what we raised to get that done. And
so in that case, in preparation for the San Diego Angel Conference, which ended up being a really good source of funds, what was the checklist that you had to go through in addition to knowing you had some functioning platform that moved this was from a big idea pitch to I really did build something pitch to I won those investors over. So tell me what your checklist was for an angel conference and why you were so successful.
Oh man, I like to laugh at this question because I'm now I've been close friends for a long time, but the fund managers at the time, Misty Rusk and Stacy Pena, who were running the Angel Conference, we had bickered often back and forth about it in regards to hey, well, why are you asking me so many darn questions? Like it was, I mean, the due diligence process was. I mean, I'd been told that, SDAC's due diligence process is like as bad as it can possibly get, but truthfully, and maybe kudos to them for this, but the amount of discretion and an insight that they go into with their teams, whether it's, on the financial side, you have multiple accountants breaking down, what it is that you're really bringing in or not, to be quite frank with you. On the other side, of course, I ended up doing 7 live demos with the tech before we even got funding, which was crazy, before the final pitch, even occurred. And it's a lot of time in between all that. I think it's very important that you spend a lot of time, and the founder, myself, doing a lot of due diligence on who's going to fund you, right? Are they the right people? That money comes in, everything's great, sure, but 6 weeks later, when they want status reports and updates and all sorts of things, are those the folks that you want, really breathing down your neck a little bit? So it was a long process. I want to say in total, it probably took us 4 to 5 months of a lot of background and digging on both sides part. And it ultimately concludes with you in a room with at this case, it was the San Diego Angel Conference board, but basically debating valuation, right? Which, yeah, that's good
more,
Lord. I mean, we could
more,
debate that till the cows come home.
I was
Yeah.
going to say more numbers, right?
Yeah, and then somebody around the table is going to quote what the Fed's doing on a given day, and that's going to change depending on how they wake up out of bed, right? So it's ridiculous, to be quite honest with you, but it's part of what you do.
So now you've gotten some money in, and there are people attached to this money. So you have to evangelize, you've already evangelized to get them in the, in the door. So how often do you talk to an angel after they've written the check? What were some of the expectations that they had in the first, say, month or two after that check is used?
Oh man, this is where raising from angels is a fantastic thing, because angel investors understand that maybe one out of the 25 checks that they write a year is going to ever do something. And so I think with the San Diego Angel Conference, ultimately where we landed on evaluation and how much we were able to get from the group, it ultimately amounted to an investment that look, it's not going to necessarily, I would say, break their bank per se, but in regards to expectations, we have a pretty long runaway, in terms of, it's really 5 to 6 years before, they're coming back saying, hey, what really happened here, sort of thing. Luckily, and I love to brag about this, out of all the 3 companies, they've invested in my year, we're still doing the most in revenue. Right. So, I think it's interesting, but not bad at all. There's a quarterly report that I put together for our friends and family who have invested in the company, and the same report goes over to them. I always receive pretty good feedback in terms of, hey, keep up the good work. What else are they going to tell you if you're making money, to be quite honest with you? But at the same time, they're fantastic. They'll reach out, now and then, especially, like I said, Misty Rusk is a close friend, and she'll often check in and say, hey, Dom, how can we help? Is there any connections you need kind of in the space? And so, yeah, it's been good. It's been as good as it possibly can be. At the end of the day, Gene, if I could do it all over again, I would have never raised money to even begin with. But, you do what you do. And, luckily we have some really good circumstances around it.
Did they, or did you specify how the funds were going to be used? And was that important when they peppered you with questions as to the amount and reason for the funding?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that at the end of the day, the reason that a student founded and led company was the first one to win ASTAC was because of how we handled those questions. I was very, very, straightforward through the entire process. More than 85% of the funds were going to go to sales, right? We were going to do everything we could to get a product in front of people and get money coming in the door. Whether or not the product needed refinement or not after that, we would figure out. But we really had a straightforward path to revenue. We had done the research. We knew people needed it, and we knew how to have the right conversations. At that point, it became, hey, we want to use these funds so we can have as many conversations as we possibly can. Because with a team that was as small as it was, around 2 years ago now, Yeah, it would have been very difficult. So yeah, by all means though, I think if we had went in and said, hey, our platform's where it is today, and it's operational, right? But we want to do this and this and this and this and this to it. I think we would have received a lot of setback, because at some point it goes, hey, does this thing make money or not, right? You're now 12, 15 months in development and you haven't moved a single transaction, right? But good question. The sales part and our team's relentlessness not to come off of, putting the majority of the funds to sales, I think ultimately, allowed us to win and take home money from them.
Did your connections as an athlete, and especially since you did a survey, were they later low-hanging fruit for your first customers?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Sports is, I like to think every industry is this way. Like I said, it's a fanciful thought, so I'm not really sure, but I know sports for sure. Connections is everything, right? And I was, I had an awesome career on the diamond playing baseball before, I ended up getting hurt. And so a lot of those connections, they stay with you forever. Whether it was the guys I played with, the coaches I played under, the programs that I helped win a lot of games for, those people are always willing to take a phone call from you and really do what it takes. And ultimately, it got to the point with how we used social media to market ourselves and create just such a monstrous, honestly, audience for a startup. We got to the point people were basically saying, hey, when is this product coming out? Like, when can we get involved? It's almost like, I think we did a good job of getting people very excited about what we do, to the point where it's, my dad always, says, good marketing is getting in front of somebody and they get that feeling of, hey, Gene, take my money from me. Right. I want this so bad, take it from me. Right. So, and, that's still how we market and like to do things today. Right. There's just so much proof in the pudding that people are ready for it. But yeah, by all means, being an athlete, being in the sports space, especially being around NIL, still to this day, we're the youngest team in the NIL space, quote unquote. There's a lot of other folks out there that have played college sports that are doing some incredible things with their companies, but we're still the closest to these kids, right? In age, I'm on this phone call today, at least I'm 21 years old, right? So there's so much, there's just that intangible that you just can't, if I pitch to a university versus a 55-year-old, guy coming out of private equity or something, right? Maybe the bias there is that guy might know a little bit more than me, and by golly, he sure does. But, where's the heart at, right? And these schools care about that. They care about, what's the point at the end of the day? Is just another money-making scheme? Is it something that's really going to help athletes, et cetera? And so, we've been able to connect on a personal level with that, because that's just who we are. So
I think you're mentioning that the athletic community may be different than in other industries, and that there's some sort of camaraderie or speaking among yourselves within, breathing the same air, may be part of the formula, the intangible for your model. Would you think that's what maybe is one of the elements of why you're being so successful? Because it's your age, and like you said, your age as an athlete, you've been planted right into the middle of the community in sort of like in live time.
Yeah. I think more of a philosophical thing I've learned through this whole process is that you cannot streamline authenticity, right? You just can't, right? There's no possible way. I tell people that there is nothing else on earth I could be doing better than what I'm doing right now, because it is just so in line with who I really am, like in age, in mentality, and what I've done, right? And so, but by all means, that intangible is everything for us, right? It allows us to have conversations that otherwise folks could not, and to come at it from a level of empathy, right? That most people can't, right? Because I think being a 21-year-old kid, there's college athletes that I'm helped getting paid that are still 2, 3, 4 years older than me, especially the way college is working these
Right.
days. I can't tell you how many 24-year-old quarterbacks I've seen in the past, 3 or 4 years now. And so understanding why these college athletes want to get paid so badly, right? Because they're spending so many hours in the weight room, in the classroom, on the field, and yet, they're still stuck, grocery shopping twice a month, at a dollar store, right? Like there's there's just nuances to it that you can't make up, and you can't fake it. You just can't. And so, yeah, by all means, I think the authenticity has just come across, very naturally, and it's by all means helped us.
You're truly have lived the experience that others don't have the opportunity. So let's kind of wrap up with a couple of thoughts you might have for just simply aspiring student entrepreneurs. I've had other discussions as to whether or not what is the right age for someone to start a company. And it's more common today for someone in your age group to have the dream of being an entrepreneur in their 20s. So is there a couple of words of advice or thoughts about having done that?
Sure. I think on the tangible side of things, I think some things that you can quite literally, get up out of bed and do tomorrow, right? We are, I won't go into any details, but we clearly understand the current place of our, fiscal and economic climate, and that if you have a business today that helps other people make money, it will be successful. The thing is, I talk to so many young folks that are my age, even older, right? 30s, 40s, that are trying to get startups off the ground and consistently running into problems. And it is really around this value premise and really maybe lack thereof value balance, right? It's hey, buy my product, buy my service, do this, do that. I'm going to extract all this value from you, but what's coming back to you is maybe a fourth of that or a fifth of that, right? When we sit down with a client, whether it's a university, a collective, now whether it's a professional sports team, in that conversation, it's, hey, you're going to spend X with us and get 3, 4, 5, 6, 10X back, right? And we can map that for you. We can show you the proof is all right here. And so when I think about young entrepreneurs, the advice I give is, can you stress test that? And that's an uncomfortable question to ask, because maybe the idea that you have, maybe it does suck more value out of the market than it gives. And in that case, it's not a good product, right? You can only trick people for so long. It's very hard to separate people from their hard-earned money, as it should be. And so tangibly, that's the advice I would give. If there's so much more to that nuance, but I think that's a very good, framework for it. The second part, maybe being more so on the intangible side of things, is I think people in my generation, there's almost too much information available. There's too many clubs you can join. There's too many advisors on LinkedIn that want to talk to you and, have you pay them $1,000 an hour for advice. And there's almost too much. And I would say, do the best you possibly can to stick true to whatever it is your vision and values are, and do not be afraid to say no to things, right? Because I think when you get a startup and it's a decent idea, folks are going to come from the woodworks, man. You're going to have folks coming out of nowhere saying, "Hey, can I invest in this? Can I introduce you to this person?" And man, don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. Distractions are everywhere. They're so easy. But I would stick. If you can find that niche thing that provides more value back to the market than you take from it, damn, you got a good business coming for you, or at least something good's going to come of it, I think. So that's really the advice I would give to young folks that are my age or in their 20s, 30s that are trying to start companies, is really, having that realistic conversation. And ultimately everything that I'm saying is all about putting not just the customer first, it's about putting others first, right? It's beyond that, right? If you're a clothing company and you have suppliers, if you are a brick and mortar coffee company, if you're a software developer in the sports space, right? It's really putting other people forward. If you do that and put those folks first, you're going to make good decisions. The product's going to be, built off the right backbone, and good things are just going to happen. I'm a believer in that for sure.
Well, I think that's some really good advice that you shared, Dominyck, and I really appreciate you coming on as a guest on Experienced Voices. And we'll look forward to hearing of your progress in the next few months, and years. So thanks again.
Jane, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You have been listening to the podcast series Experienced Voices. To hear more and subscribe, visit AmericanEntrepreneurship.com/podcast, where you will also find a form for listener feedback.